Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm Omar Garzuddin from the UN Population Fund, from the Media and Communications branch of UN Population Fund. And we're happy to be here today to present to you the State of World Population Report, which is entitled this year, Facing a Challenging World, Women, Population and Climate. This report has been launched today in more than 130 cities around the world. So it's taking place right now all around the world, and we thought that we would like to be with you, UNCA members, to present this report. We have with us two presenters, Richard College, who is the editor of the report, and Daniel Schenzel, who is a climate change expert and sustainable development expert at UNFPA, who are going to present the report, talk about its findings and why we're launching it this year about this subject. And then we'll take some questions and anything you might want to ask. Thank you. Richard?
Good morning. I'm going to start with a couple of remarks. This year's State of World Population Report calls attention to women and vulnerable populations on the response to climate change. The report states that technology alone is not the problem or the solution to climate change. Instead, climate change is a human problem brought about by human activity. Climate change is about people. People are affected by it, people must adapt to it, and only people can stop it. During the past half-century, a rapid rise in greenhouse gas emissions has pushed humanity toward the brink of a climate disaster. Our impending climate crisis is perhaps the most inequitable threats of our time. Right now, the carbon footprint of the poorest billion people on Earth is a mere 3% of the world's total carbon footprint. Yet, it is the poorest billion who will bear the overwhelming brunt of our changing climate. For many people, especially poor women in poor countries, climate change is here and now. Poor women in poor countries are among the hardest hit by climate change, mainly because they are more likely than men to live in poverty and therefore more likely to lack the resources they need to cope with the effects of climate change. UNFPA's State of World Population 2009 underscores the importance of empowering women to cope with the changes in climate that have already taken place and adapt to the changes that are still to come. But the report also underscores the importance of empowering women to become agents for positive change. Women who are in charge of their lives are empowered to change climate for the better. The empowerment of women means allowing them to make their own decisions and to be fully involved in the public decisions that affect their lives. UNFPA's report calls on all countries to invest in women, investments that empower women and girls, particularly through education and health, bolster economic development and reduce poverty, and have a beneficial impact on climate. Girls with more education, for example, tend to have smaller and healthier families as adults. Women with access to reproductive health services, including voluntary family planning, have lower fertility rates that may contribute to slower growth in greenhouse gas emissions in the long run. Helping women to make their own decisions about family size would protect their health, make their lives easier, help put their countries on a sustainable path toward development, and ensure lower greenhouse gas emissions in the long run. This report argues that we cannot successfully confront climate change if we neglect the needs, rights, and potential of half the people on our planet. Overall, climate change is not just an issue of energy or the environment. It is also a moral issue of justice and equity. All nations and people have the right to development, and all countries are challenged to develop in ways that are socially equitable and environmentally sound. Women should be part of any agreement on climate change, not as an afterthought or because it's politically correct, but because it's the right thing to do. Our future as humanity depends on unleashing the full potential of all human beings and the full capacity of women to bring about change.
Thanks, Richard. Now, as I said, also Daniel Schenzel, our expert on sustainable development and climate change at UNFPA, will add some remarks.
Thank you, Omar, and good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this launch and to discuss the important links between women, population and our changing climate. The world's population has reached 6.8 billion. Some 79 million people are added every year. In 2050, the population could be as high as 10.5 billion or remain as low as 8 billion. The difference of 2.5 billion between these two limits is highly relevant for climate change and for the long-term future of humankind. But the effects of population size and growth on greenhouse gas emissions are different in different places. In industrialized countries, population growth is low, but people's consumption is very high, leading to high total emissions. In several large developing countries, successful economic growth has meant rising emissions per person at a time when population is still indeed growing. Least developed countries have the highest population growth rates, yet are the lowest emitters of greenhouse gas emissions. These countries will only contribute significantly in the future to global climate change if they develop in high emissions ways, as has been the case with richer countries. As this report says, all nations and all people have the right to development. Developing countries must have an opportunity to ascend the income ladder, as the World Bank's recent World Development Report put it. The challenge we face is to find environmentally sustainable pathways to development for all nations. When considering the impacts of population, we have to think beyond population size and growth. Where we live, how old we are, and how we organize our lives into small or larger families are also very important. Smaller households in both developed and developing countries consume considerably more per capita. This is why, as our report points out, a divorce causes more emissions than the birth of a child. Also, older people tend to consume less, and women are more likely to be sustainable consumers, so women's involvement in climate change solutions is central to reducing emissions. The battle for sustainable development is being waged in urban areas, which concentrate most of the world's economic and demographic growth, and also most of the world's emissions. By 2050, Africa's population will increase by about 1 billion, 800 million of whom will live in urban areas. In Asia, the urban population is expected to grow by almost 2 billion over the same period. Planning ahead for this growth is essential for sustainable development and for climate change. Despite misconceptions about the negative impacts of urban growth, cities actually offer better chances for long-term sustainability. When they are well-planned, well-designed, and well-administered, cities can reduce per capita energy use while also minimizing pressure on surrounding land and natural resources. We tend to focus on where the impacts of climate change will be and on what they will be, but not on who will be impacted. This report shows that adapting to climate change requires understanding that people have different vulnerabilities and capacities. Vulnerability is greater among the poor. People in least developed countries will be the most affected by climate change, despite contributing the least to greenhouse gas emissions. Vulnerability varies between men and women, between the young, the middle-aged, and the elderly, and between those living in urban and rural areas. The capacity to adapt means learning about climate change impacts and developing resilience to them. One of the most important ways to adapt to climate change is through building healthy, educated, empowered populations. Better health infrastructure and services, including provision of reproductive health to meet unmet need for family planning, contribute to the empowerment of women and help families better adapt to climate change. This will also accelerate the stabilization of population, which in the long term will impact emissions. How many people we are, where we live, and how we live are crucial for understanding climate change and for finding effective ways to manage its negative impacts. This is the kind of knowledge that we need to incorporate into climate change models, governmental agreements, and the plans and programs that countries are developing to reduce emissions and to adapt to the current and future impacts of climate change. We believe that this state of the world population will contribute to achieving these important goals. Thank you.